London, 1835. She believed in fairy tales until she discovered that even her own family considered her the mistake. Rejected by suitors who never truly saw her, dismissed by a society that valued only surface beauty, and overshadowed by a sister whose golden curls caught every eye in every ballroom. Alana Whitmore had learned to make herself small, invisible, forgettable, but it was precisely this quiet grace, this gentle heart that helped elderly ladies navigate treacherous marble floors and comforted crying children at society gatherings. That would capture the attention of the most powerful man in all of England. The Duke of Ravencrest, a millionaire whose fortune could buy kingdoms, whose honesty was legendary, and whose choice of bride would shock London to its very foundations. That night, beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Whitmore estate, a promise would be whispered. A promise that would change everything. But first, let me tell you how a duke learned to see what everyone else had been blind to. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Whitmore House, casting long shadows across the Persian carpets as Alana carefully arranged pink roses in the drawing room. Her movements were precise, elegant, the result of years of trying to be perfect enough to earn just a fraction of the attention her younger sister received effortlessly. "Alana, for heaven's sake, must you always wear that dreadful pink?" Lady Whitmore's voice cut through the peaceful morning like a blade through silk. "It does nothing for your complexion." Alana's fingers paused on a rose stem. The pink gowns were a quiet rebellion, her one splash of color in a life painted in muted tones. "I find it cheerful, Mama. Cheerful." Her mother's laugh held no warmth. "What you need, my dear, is to be practical. Your sister Isabella has received 3 proposals this season already, and the season has barely begun. You, however, double quotes. The sentence hung unfinished, heavy with disappointment. Through the doorway, Alana could see Isabella in the music room, her golden hair catching the light as she practiced her pianoforte. Even from a distance, her sister's beauty was undeniable, the kind that made grown men stumble over their words and forget their own names. "The Dowager Countess of Pembroke has requested our presence at tea this afternoon," Lady Whitmore continued. "She specifically asked for both of my daughters. I suspect she wishes to play matchmaker." Alana nodded dutifully. She knew her role at these gatherings, to fade into the background while Isabella charmed everyone in the room. To help the elderly ladies with their tea, to listen to their stories with genuine interest while the other young ladies tittered behind their fans about such boring company. "And Alana?" Her mother's voice softened slightly. "Try to make an effort. Perhaps if you showed more animation, more VIVACITY ... double quotes, more like Isabella, she meant." But Alana had learned long ago that she would never be Isabella, and trying only made the difference more painfully obvious. "Of course, Mama." As her mother swept from the room in a rustle of blue silk, Alana returned to her roses. She didn't notice the figure watching from the garden window, didn't see the way his eyes followed her gentle movements, didn't know that Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Ravencrest, had been observing her family for weeks. And she certainly didn't know that he had already made his choice. The Duke of Ravencrest was not a man given to romantic fancies. At 32, he had built an empire through steel determination and unwavering honesty, qualities that had made him both the most eligible bachelor in England and the most difficult to impress. Which was precisely why he now found himself concealed behind the ancient oak tree in the Whitmore garden, watching a young woman tend to roses with the same care most people reserve for precious gems. Alexander had come to London with a single purpose: to find a wife. Not for love, he'd given up on such foolish notions years ago, but for the practical necessity of securing his lineage. His investigation into potential brides had led him to the Whitmore family, specifically to Isabella, whose beauty was celebrated throughout the ton. But it was the other sister who had captured his attention. Alana Whitmore moved through the world like a secret, noticed only by those who needed her kindness. He'd watched her at the Hartwell ball 3 nights ago, seen her gently guide old Lord Pembridge to a chair when his arthritis flared, had observed her patient conversation with young Timothy Ashford when the boy had been overwhelmed by the crowd. While Isabella danced and flirted and commanded attention, Alana had quietly made the evening better for a dozen different people. "Your Grace?" Alexander turned to find his valet, Morrison, approaching through the garden gate. The man's expression was carefully neutral, but Alexander caught the hint of concern in his eyes. "The young lady has been inside for 20 minutes, Morrison murmured. "Perhaps it's time to make your official call?" Alexander straightened his black tailcoat and adjusted his silver cufflinks. "Indeed, it's time to meet the Whitmore family properly." As they walked toward the house, neither man noticed the figure watching from an upstairs window. Isabella Whitmore's blue eyes glittered with calculation as she observed the most sought-after man in London approaching her home. She had no idea he hadn't come for her. The Whitmore drawing room had been transformed for receiving the Duke of Ravencrest. Every surface gleamed, fresh flowers adorned every table, and Lady Whitmore had changed her gown twice before settling on her finest burgundy silk. Isabella sat poised on the damask sofa, her golden hair arranged in perfect ringlets, her rose-pink gown chosen to complement her porcelain complexion. She was, quite simply, a vision. Alana, by contrast, had been positioned near the window in her usual pink a softer shade today that her mother had declared adequate with her needlework. She was meant to provide a quiet backdrop to Isabella's brilliance. "His Grace, the Duke of Ravencrest," announced Jameson, their butler, and suddenly the room seemed to shrink. Alexander Blackwood was not conventionally handsome, but he possessed something far more dangerous: presence. Tall and lean, with dark hair and penetrating gray eyes, he commanded attention simply by existing. His black superfine coat was perfectly tailored, his white cravat intricately tied, and his boots shone like mirrors. Lady Whitmore practically levitated from her chair. "Your Grace!" What an unexpected honor. "Lady Whitmore." Alexander's voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of warmth that made it clear he was here by choice, not obligation. "Thank you for receiving me. I hope you'll forgive the impropriety of calling without prior arrangement." "Not at all. Please allow me to present my daughters. This is Isabella, my eldest." Isabella rose with practiced grace, executing a perfect curtsy. "Your Grace, I'm honored to make your acquaintance." Alexander bowed politely, but his eyes were already moving past her to figure by the window. "And Miss?" "Oh," Lady Whitmore's voice carried a note of surprise, as if she'd forgotten Alana existed. "This is my younger daughter, Alana." Alana set aside her needlework and rose, her curtsy perhaps less polished than Isabella's, but no less sincere. "Your Grace." For a moment their eyes met, and Alana felt something shift in the air between them. His gaze wasn't dismissive or indifferent as so many men's were when they looked at her. Instead, she felt seen. "Miss Alana?" Alexander's voice was softer now. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Not at all, Your Grace. I was only—" "Alana does beautiful needlework," Lady Whitmore interrupted, clearly flustered by the Duke's attention to her younger daughter. "But I'm sure you prefer to hear Isabella play. She has the most accomplished touch on the pianoforte." "Perhaps later," Alexander replied, not taking his eyes off Alana. "I understand you assist with charitable work in the parish, Miss Alana?" The question caught everyone by surprise. Isabella's smile faltered slightly, and Lady Whitmore looked as if she'd swallowed her tea wrong. Yes, Your Grace. I visit with some of the elderly parishioners. Mrs. Henley and Mr. Jameson particularly enjoy the company. How commendable! Alexander's approval was genuine, and Alana felt warmth spread through her chest. I found that true character is revealed in how one treats those who can offer nothing in return. Indeed, Lady Whitmore said quickly. Isabella also contributes to charity. She organized the flower arrangements for the spring fair. But Alexander's attention remained fixed on Alana. Tell me about Mrs. Henley. How long have you been visiting her? For the next hour, Alexander engaged Alana in conversation about her charitable work, her reading habits, her thoughts on everything from the weather to the latest political developments. Meanwhile, Isabella grew increasingly agitated, her practiced smile becoming more strained with each passing minute. When Alexander finally took his leave, he bowed to both sisters, but his parting words were directed at Alana alone. I hope we shall have occasion to speak again soon, Miss Alana. After the drawing room door closed behind him, the silence stretched until Isabella's composure finally cracked. What? She hissed. Was that? But Alana, still feeling the warmth of genuine attention for the first time in her life, simply smiled. That evening, as Alana brushed her long black hair before her dressing table mirror, Isabella burst into her bedchamber without knocking. We need to talk. Alana set down her brush and turned to face her sister. Isabella's beauty was undimmed by anger, but there was something sharp in her blue eyes that Alana had never seen before. Of course. What about? Don't play innocent with me, Alana. I saw the way the Duke looked at you today. The way he ignored me. Isabella began pacing, her silk wrapper billowing behind her. Do you have any idea what you're playing with? I'm not playing with anything. The Duke was merely being polite. Polite? Isabella's laugh was bitter. Men like Ravencrest don't waste an hour discussing charity work out of politeness. He was ... interested. The word hung between them like an accusation. That's ridiculous, Alana said quietly. He probably felt sorry for me. Sorry for you? Isabella whirled to face her. Alana, look at me. Really look at me. She gestured to her reflection in Alana's mirror. I am everything men want. I'm beautiful, accomplished, charming. I've had 3 proposals this season alone. And yet today, the most eligible man in England couldn't take his eyes off ... Alana's heart constricted. Her sister's words, meant to be cruel, instead carried an edge of desperate confusion that made them somehow worse. Isabella, I never asked for his attention. No, you didn't, did you? Isabella's voice dropped to a whisper. That's what makes this so much worse. You didn't have to try. You just existed, and somehow that was enough. For a moment, vulnerability flickered across Isabella's perfect features, and Alana saw something she'd never noticed before. Fear. I won't compete with you, Alana said softly. If you're interested in the Duke, it's too late for that. Isabella's mask slipped back into place. But I want you to understand something, sister dear. Men may be momentarily intrigued by your novelty, but they marry women like me. Women who can be assets to their position, who can shine in their ballrooms and bear them beautiful children. She moved to the door, then paused. The Duke may think he wants someone different, but when the initial fascination fades, he'll remember what he truly needs in a duchess. Don't let yourself believe otherwise. After Isabella left, Alana stared at her reflection for a long time. Her sister was right about one thing. She wasn't the kind of woman dukes married. She was too quiet, too plain, too unremarkable. But for one afternoon, she had felt like she mattered to someone. And despite everything Isabella had said, She couldn't quite let go of that feeling. Outside her window, London sparkled in the lamplight, full of secrets and possibilities. And somewhere in that glittering darkness, a duke was making plans that would change everything. 3 days later, Alexander stood in the shadows of the Whitmore Library, having been told by Jameson that Miss Alana often spent her afternoons there. What he hadn't expected was to overhear a conversation that would crystallize everything he'd begun to suspect about the Whitmore family. "Really, Isabella, you must try harder with the Duke," Lady Whitmore's voice carried clearly from the adjoining morning room. "I cannot fathom what came over him the other day, paying so much attention to Alana. Believe me, Mama, I'm as mystified as you are." Isabella's voice held that particular edge. Alexander was beginning to recognize the sound of beauty accustomed to universal adoration finding itself questioned. Perhaps he was simply being charitable. After all, everyone knows Alana is, well, she lacks the qualities that typically attract gentlemen. "Such a pity," Lady Whitmore sighed. "If only she had half your beauty or even your wit. Instead, she seems determined to waste her time with those dreadful old people and their ailments. It's almost embarrassing," Isabella continued. "The way she fuses over them, as if their approval could somehow compensate for her ... deficiencies. Sometimes, I think she prefers their company because they're the only people who don't immediately notice how unremarkable she is." Alexander's hands clenched into fists. The casual cruelty in Isabella's voice, the way she spoke about acts of kindness as if they were character flaws, revealed everything he needed to know about her true nature. "Well, we must work with what we have," Lady Whitmore said practically. "At least Alana is biddable. She accepts whatever match we arrange, unlike some young ladies who have romantic notions above their station." "Oh, I'm sure she's already spinning fantasies about the Duke." Isabella laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Can you imagine? Plain little Alana thinking she could capture the attention of a man like Ravencrest? It would be amusing if it weren't so pathetic." Alexander had heard enough. He slipped from the library and made his way to the garden, where he found Alana exactly where he'd expected, kneeling beside a rosebush, gently supporting a climbing vine that had begun to droop. She looked up at his approach, and her face brightened with genuine pleasure. "Your Grace, I didn't expect—" "That is, I hope you don't mind my being in the garden." "On the contrary," Alexander said, studying her face in the afternoon light. Her features might not have Isabella's classical perfection, but there was something infinitely more appealing in her warm brown eyes and expressive mouth. "I was hoping to find you here. You were?" The wonder in her voice made his chest tighten. "I wanted to ask you something, Miss Alana." Alexander moved closer, noting how she didn't simper or flutter as so many young ladies did in his presence. Instead, she simply waited, attentive and genuine. "What do you think makes a person truly beautiful?" The question clearly caught her off guard. That's a rather philosophical inquiry." "Your Grace, humor me." Alana was quiet for a moment, her fingers absently stroking the rose petals. I think true beauty comes from how someone treats others when they believe no one is watching. It's in the small kindnesses, the moments of genuine care. Physical beauty fades, but the beauty of character ... She looked up at him, color rising in her cheeks. "Forgive me. I'm probably not the right person to ask about beauty, aren't you?" Alexander's voice was soft. "I think you might be the only person qualified to answer." Before Alana could respond, Isabella's voice rang out across the garden. "Your Grace!" What a delightful surprise. Alexander turned to see Isabella approaching, resplendent in a gown of pale blue silk that matched her eyes perfectly. Her smile was dazzling, her posture flawless, her beauty undeniable. And yet, for the first time in his life, Alexander found himself completely unmoved by such perfection. "Miss Isabella?" he said politely, then turned back to Alana. "Miss Alana, would you do me the honor of taking a turn about the garden?" The shock on Isabella's face was almost comical, almost, as Alexander offered Alana his arm and led her away from her sister. He made a decision that would scandalize all of London. He was going to court the unremarkable Miss Alana Whitmore, and he was going to enjoy every moment of it. The following weeks brought a transformation to Alana's quiet existence that she could never have imagined. The Duke of Ravencrest began calling with increasing frequency, and each visit seemed designed to showcase her gentle nature rather than overshadow it. He brought her books of poetry, then spent hours discussing the verses that moved her. He asked her opinion on matters of estate management, particularly regarding the welfare of tenants and servants. Most surprisingly, he requested her company on visits to elderly members of the parish, something that would have bored Isabella to tears but delighted Alana completely. "You have a gift," Alexander observed one afternoon as they left Mrs. Henley's cottage. The elderly woman had been in obvious pain from her arthritis, but Alana's gentle presence had soon had her laughing and sharing stories of her late husband's courtship. "For what?" Alana asked, genuinely confused. "For seeing people, really seeing them." Alexander helped her into his elegant black carriage, noting how she arranged her pink silk gown to avoid wrinkling. Mrs. Henley lit up the moment you walked into her parlor. "She's lonely," Alana said simply. "Her children live so far away, and she has such wonderful stories. I think she just needs someone to listen." Alexander studied her profile as the carriage rolled through the London streets. "And yet your own family doesn't seem to appreciate this quality in you." Alana's hands stilled on her reticule. "They love me in their own way. They simply have different priorities, such as..." The question was gentle but persistent, and Alana found herself speaking more honestly than she ever had with anyone. "They believe beauty and accomplishments are what matter in securing a good marriage. And they're not wrong. Isabella has never wanted for suitors, but what about what you want? What makes you happy?" The concept seemed foreign to her. "I want my family to be content, to find good matches, to maintain our position in society." "That's what you think you should want," Alexander said quietly. "But what does your heart want, Alana?" The sound of her Christian name on his lips made her pulse quicken. I don't know if my heart's desires are relevant. Your Grace, they're relevant to me." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility and promise. Alana stared at him, searching his gray eyes for some sign that she was misunderstanding, that this was all some elaborate jest. Instead, she found only sincerity. "Why?" she whispered. Alexander reached across the carriage and took her gloved hand in his. "Because in a world full of people trying to be what they think others want them to be, you're simply yourself. Because you choose kindness when no one is watching. Because you see beauty in rose gardens and elderly ladies and quiet moments that others overlook. I'm not accomplished like Isabella. I don't shine in ballrooms or dazzle at dinner parties. No," Alexander agreed. "You do something far more remarkable. You make the world a gentler place simply by existing in it." Alana felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her this way, had ever made her feel as if her quiet nature was a gift rather than a deficit. "Your Grace, Alexander," he corrected softly. "When we're alone, please call me Alexander." Alexander. His name felt precious on her tongue. "Why are you telling me this?" His thumb brushed across her knuckles through her glove. "Because I want you to know that you're seen, Alana, truly seen. And what I see is extraordinary. As their carriage pulled up to Whitmore House, neither of them noticed Isabella watching from her bedroom window, her beautiful face twisted with an emotion she'd never experienced before, the fear of being forgotten. The Pemberton Ball was the event of the season, and Alana stood at the edge of the glittering ballroom feeling more invisible than ever. Her pink silk gown, while perfectly respectable, paled beside the elaborate confections worn by other young ladies. Isabella, resplendent in gold tissue that made her look like a goddess, held court near the orchestra, surrounded by her usual collection of admirers. Alana was content to remain in the shadows, watching the dancing and enjoying the spectacle, when a familiar deep voice spoke beside her. "You look lovely tonight." She turned to find Alexander approaching, magnificent in his black evening wear. His presence immediately drew curious stares from nearby guests. The Duke of Ravencrest rarely attended such frivolous gatherings. "Your Grace," she curtsied, trying to ignore how her heart raced at his nearness. "I didn't expect to see you here. I came hoping for the honor of dancing with you." The words seemed to echo in the sudden quiet that had fallen around them. Alana was dimly aware of conversations stopping, of fans stilling, of every eye in the ballroom turning toward them. "With with me?" she stammered. Alexander's smile was warm and entirely unconcerned with their audience. "With you." He offered his arm, and after a moment of stunned hesitation, Alana placed her hand on his sleeve. The crowd parted before them as they made their way to the dance floor, whispers following in their wake. "They're staring," Alana murmured. "Let them," Alexander replied. "They're witnessing something remarkable." "What's that?" A duke finally developing good taste. The opening strains of a waltz filled the air, and Alexander swept her into the dance. Alana had never been considered a particularly graceful dancer, another area where Isabella excelled, but in Alexander's arms, she felt as if she were floating. "You're trembling," he observed softly. "I'm terrified I'll disgrace myself," she admitted. "Everyone is watching, and I'm not used to this kind of attention." "Look at me," Alexander commanded gently. "Only at me." Alana raised her eyes to his, and the rest of the ballroom seemed to fade away. There was only the music, the warmth of his hand at her waist, the steady gray gaze that made her feel as if she were the only person in the world. "Better?" he asked. "Much." She managed to smile. "Though I suspect tomorrow's gossip will be quite scandalous." "Undoubtedly." Alexander's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Though I hope to give them something even more shocking to discuss." Before Alana could ask what he meant, the waltz ended. Instead of escorting her back to the edge of the room as she expected, Alexander kept her hand firmly tucked in his arm and led her toward the terrace doors. "Your Grace, where are we going?" "Somewhere we can speak privately." The terrace was deserted, lit only by torches and the light spilling from the ballroom windows. The evening air was warm and sweet with the scent of jasmine from the gardens below. Alexander turned to face her, and in the flickering torchlight, his expression was more serious than she'd ever seen it. "Alana?" he began, and her name on his lips still had the power to make her heart skip. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Mine as well," she whispered. "Then you'll understand why I can't wait any longer to ask you something that's been burning in my heart since the first moment. I saw you tending roses in your garden." Alana's breath caught as Alexander dropped to one knee, producing a ring box from his coat pocket. The emerald and diamond ring that caught the torchlight was magnificent, but not nearly as brilliant as the hope shining in his eyes. "Miss Alana Whitmore," Alexander said formally, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Alana couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the most powerful man in England dueling before her, offering her everything she never dared to dream of. But but why? She finally managed. I'm not beautiful like Isabella. I'm not accomplished or witty or you're you, Alexander interrupted, rising to take her hands in his. You're kind and genuine and lovely in ways that have nothing to do with fashion or accomplishments. You make me want to be a better man, Alana. You make me believe in goodness again. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Alexander, yes. The ring slipped onto her finger with perfect precision, as if it had been made for her. Which, Alexander realized with satisfaction, it had been. He'd commissioned it weeks ago, certain even then of his choice. As he drew her into his arms for their first kiss, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the ballroom doorway, or the way Isabella's perfect features contorted with rage and desperation. The game was far from over. The announcement of the Duke of Ravencrest's engagement to Miss Alana Whitmore sent shockwaves through London society that were still reverberating days later. In the Whitmore drawing room, the aftermath was no less dramatic. I simply cannot comprehend it, Lady Whitmore declared for the dozenth time since Alexander had formally requested Alana's hand. She paced before the morning room windows, her usual composure completely shattered. Isabella is the beauty of the family. Isabella is the accomplished one. Isabella is the one who should be marrying a duke. Isabella herself sat in ominous silence on the yellow silk sofa, her perfect posture betraying none of the turmoil visible in her eyes. She had said very little since the announcement, but the tension radiating from her slight frame was palpable. Alana, meanwhile, sat near the window with her needlework, the magnificent emerald on her finger catching the morning light. She was trying to appear calm, but the enormity of what had happened kept washing over her in waves of disbelief. Perhaps, Alana said quietly, the Duke simply values different qualities than we assumed. Different qualities? Lady Whitmore whirled to face her younger daughter. What qualities could you possibly possess that Isabella does not have in greater measure? The question hung in the air, its cruelty made worse by the matter-of-fact tone in which it had been delivered. Alana's hands stilled on her embroidery, and for a moment, the room was deadly quiet. Apparently, Isabella said, speaking for the first time that morning, her voice like ice, our dear Duke prefers his women weak and unremarkable. How ... Unusual for a man of his reputation. Isabella! Lady Whitmore looked shocked by her daughter's boldness. Oh, come now. Mama, let's speak plainly. Isabella rose gracefully and moved to stand before Alana. The entire town is wondering the same thing. What could the Duke of Ravencrest, who could have his pick of the most beautiful women in England, possibly see in mousy little Alana? Alana looked up at her sister, and for the first time in her life, she felt a spark of anger kindle in her chest. Perhaps he sees someone who doesn't consider kindness to be a weakness. Kindness? Isabella laughed, but there was a brutal edge to the sound. Is that what we're calling it? Your inability to command attention, your preference for the company of elderly invalids over people of your own class, your complete lack of the social graces that mark a true lady. That's enough. The voice from the doorway was calm but carried the unmistakable authority of a duke. Alexander stood at the threshold, impeccably dressed in a dark blue coat and buff breeches, his gray eyes taking in the scene with cool assessment. The transformation in the room was immediate. Lady Whitmore straightened and forced a bright smile. Your Grace, how wonderful to see you. I heard what you were just doing, Alexander interrupted smoothly. And I find myself curious about something, Miss Isabella. Isabella arranged her features into her most beguiling smile. Of course, Your Grace. What might that be? I'm wondering if you truly believe the qualities you've just described: compassion, humility, genuine care for others are weaknesses rather than strengths. The smile faltered slightly. I didn't mean to imply, because if so, then you and I have very different definitions of what makes a woman worthy of respect. Alexander's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. A lady who mocks acts of kindness reveals far more about her own character than about those she criticizes. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella's face had gone pale except for two bright spots of color high in her cheekbones. Alexander crossed the room to Alana, who had risen at his entrance. My dear, he said, offering her his arm. I was hoping you might join me for a drive this afternoon. There's something I'd like to show you. Of course, Alana replied. Her voice steadied despite the emotional turmoil of the past few minutes. As they prepared to leave, Alexander turned back to Lady Whitmore and Isabella. I trust that when we return, the future Duchess of Ravencrest will find herself in a more supportive family environment. After all, it would be unfortunate if such negativity were to influence her happiness in her new role. The threat was delicately delivered, but unmistakable. Lady Whitmore's forced smile became even brighter, while Isabella looked as if she'd been slapped. Of course, Your Grace, Lady Whitmore assured him. We want nothing but happiness for our dear Alana. As Alexander escorted his fiancée from the room, Alana felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. She had waited her entire life for someone to defend her, but she hadn't expected that defense to come at the cost of further fracturing her relationship with her family. Are you all right? Alexander asked quietly as they walked toward his waiting carriage. Alana considered the question. Was she all right? Her sister hated her, her mother was bewildered by her sudden elevation, and she was engaged to a man who still seemed too good to be true. I will be, she said finally. As long as you're certain about your choice. Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. Alana, he said firmly, you are not a consolation prize or charitable act. You are the woman I choose, the woman I love, the woman I want by my side for the rest of my life. Never doubt that. And as he kissed her there in the bright morning sunshine, with half of London watching from their windows, Alana finally began to believe that fairy tales might be real after all. But fairy tales, as she was about to discover, often come with wicked stepmothers, jealous siblings, and trials that test the very foundation of love itself. 2 weeks before the wedding, London society buzzed with anticipation. The Duke of Ravencrest's choice of bride remained the most fascinating topic of conversation at every gathering, but the initial shock had begun to settle into acceptance. After all, if the Duke was satisfied with his unusual choice, who were they to question it? It was at Lady Harrington's soirée that Isabella Whitmore made her move. The evening was progressing beautifully. Alana, resplendent in a gown of deep rose silk that Alexander had specifically commissioned for her, was holding court, something that still amazed her, with several duchesses and countesses who had previously barely acknowledged her existence. The transformation in her social standing was nothing short of miraculous. Alexander stood across the room, engaged in conversation with several gentlemen about parliamentary matters, but his eyes found her regularly, warming her with silent approval and affection. Isabella, meanwhile, had been uncharacteristically quiet all evening. She wore a gown of silver tissue that made her look like moonlight given form, and she had received the usual stream of compliments and attention from the gentlemen present. But anyone who looked closely would have noticed the feverish, glitter in her blue eyes, and the tightness around her perfect mouth. It was during a lull in the musical entertainment that Isabella struck. "How remarkable," she announced in a voice that carried clearly across the salon, "to see love triumph over all social expectations." Conversations quieted as attention focused on the golden-haired beauty. Isabella smiled brilliantly and continued, "I confess, I'm still quite overwhelmed by my dear sister's good fortune. Who would have imagined that the Duke would choose our quiet little Alana over anyone else?" Lady Pemberton, ever eager for gossip, took the bait. "Indeed, it has been quite surprising to many of us. Though, of course, love is wonderfully mysterious." "Oh, but that's just it," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow managed to reach every corner of the room. "I wonder if it truly is love at all." A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembled guests. Across the room, Alexander's head turned sharply toward the conversation, his expression darkening. "Whatever do you mean, dear?" asked the Dowager Countess of Marlborough, her eyes bright with malicious curiosity. Isabella's smile became even more radiant, even as her words turned poisonous. "Well, it's just that I couldn't help but notice. The Duke's interest in Alana began so suddenly. One day she was invisible as she's always been, and the next he was calling daily. It made me wonder ... what could have changed so dramatically?" "Isabella," Alana warned quietly, a chill running down her spine. But Isabella was beyond stopping now. The jealousy and resentment that had been building for weeks had finally found an outlet. "And then I remembered," Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger, "that conversation I overheard between Papa and Mama just before the Duke's first call. Something about debts, about the estate being mortgaged to the hilt, about needing a wealthy connection or facing complete ruin. The silence in the room was now absolute. Even the servants had stopped moving. "Surely you're not suggesting," Lady Harrington began, her face pale. "I'm not suggesting anything," Isabella said with false innocence. "I'm simply observing that it's quite convenient, isn't it? A wealthy duke suddenly develops a fascination with the unremarkable daughter of a family facing financial disaster. And that daughter, so grateful for any attention, accepts his proposal without question. That's enough!" Alexander's voice cut through the room like a blade, but Isabella was past caring about consequences. "Is it love, Your Grace?" she asked, turning to face him with eyes that glittered with malice. "Or is it a business transaction dressed up in pretty words? Because from where I stand, it looks remarkably like my sister is being sold to the highest bidder, just like a prize heifer at market." The gasp that arose from the assembled ladies was audible. Several gentlemen looked distinctly uncomfortable, while others leaned forward eagerly, anticipating the Duke's response. But it was Alana who spoke first. "How dare you?" Her voice was quiet, but it carried a steely quality that no one had ever heard from her before. She rose from her chair with dignity, her spine straight and her chin raised. "How dare you stand there in your silver gown and speak of business transactions when you've spent your entire life treating marriage as exactly that, a commodity, to be bartered for the highest social position?" "Alana, please," Isabella began, but her sister's newfound backbone was intimidating. "No." Alana stepped forward, and something in her demeanor made Isabella instinctively step back. "You want to know what changed the Duke's mind? I'll tell you. He discovered what true beauty looks like. Not the kind that requires powder and paint and constant attention, but the kind that comes from actually caring about other people." The room was riveted. Shy, mousy Alana Whitmore was delivering a set-down that would be talked about for months. "You speak of love as if it's some grand performance, Isabella. But real love isn't about being the most beautiful woman in the room. It's about being seen, truly seen by someone who values your heart over your face, your character over your accomplishments, your kindness over your ability to dazzle at dinner parties. Alexander was watching her with something approaching awe. This was not the gentle or tiring woman he had first met in the garden. This was a lioness defending not just herself, but their love. And yes, Alana continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, our family faces financial difficulties. But if you think for one moment that I would marry any man-duke or dustman out of obligation rather than love, then you understand nothing about me at all. She turned to Alexander, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but her voice steady. Your Grace, if you wish to withdraw your proposal based on what you've heard tonight, I will understand completely. I will not have our marriage tainted by suggestions of mercenary motives. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Every eye in the room fixed on the Duke, waiting for his response. Would he stand by his unusual choice, or would Isabella's poisonous words achieve their intended effect? Alexander crossed the room with measured steps, his expression unreadable. When he reached Alana, he took her hands in his, unmindful of their audience. Miss Whitmore, he said formally, his voice carrying to every corner of the salon. I have a confession to make. Alana's heart clenched. This was it. Isabella had won after all. I knew about your family's financial situation before I ever called at your home. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock throughout the room. Alana stared at him, confusion replacing fear. I know about the mortgaged estate, the mounting debts, your father's unfortunate investments in that failed shipping venture. I've known all of it from the beginning. You ... You knew? Alexander's smile was tender. My dear, naive woman, do you think a man in my position doesn't investigate the families of potential brides? I knew everything about the Whitmores before I ever set foot in your garden. Isabella's face had gone from triumph to confusion, to growing horror as she realized where this was leading. I could have solved your family's financial problems by marrying either of you, Alexander continued. The money would have been the same, the social elevation identical. If I were truly looking for a business transaction, Isabella would have been the obvious choice. Beautiful, accomplished, perfectly bred for the role of Duchess, the insult, delivered so calmly, was devastating. Isabella's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Instead, Alexander said, his voice warming as he gazed into Alana's eyes, I chose the woman who tends to roses and elderly neighbors with equal care. The woman who blushes when complimented and genuinely doesn't understand her own worth. The woman who just offered to release me from our engagement rather than allow our love to be questioned. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. That, ladies and gentlemen, is why I am marrying Miss Alana Whitmore. Not for duty, not for convenience, but because she is the finest woman I have ever had the privilege to know. The silence broke into a murmur of voices, some approving, others still skeptical, but all acknowledging that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Isabella stood frozen in the center of the room, her beautiful face a mask of humiliation and defeat. Her gambit had not only failed, it had spectacularly backfired, revealing her own jealous nature while highlighting exactly the qualities that made Alana so appealing. Lady Harrington, ever the diplomat, clapped her hands together. Well, I think that calls for champagne, don't you? Such a romantic declaration deserves a toast. As the room gradually returned to normal conversation, Alexander drew Alana aside. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Alana looked up at him with wonder. You really knew? All along? From the very beginning. and it changed nothing about my feelings for you. But Isabella, she's ruined now. The things she said are her consequences to bear, Alexander said firmly. You cannot protect everyone, Alana, even from their own poor choices. Across the room, Isabella slipped quietly from the salon, her silver gown shimmering like tears in the candlelight. The sister who had always been first in everything had finally learned what it felt like to be forgotten. But her story was far from over. The wedding of the Duke of Ravencrest to Miss Alana Whitmore took place on a glorious morning in June at St. George's, Hanover Square. Despite the scandal at Lady Harrington's soirée, or perhaps because of it, the church was packed with London's most illustrious families, all eager to witness what had become the most talked about marriage of the decade. Alana stood at the back of the church, her hand trembling slightly on her father's arm. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Brussels lace, commissioned by Alexander himself when he discovered that her family could not afford anything worthy of the occasion. Diamonds sparkled at her throat and ears, the Ravencrest family jewels, worn by duchesses for over 2 centuries. But more transformative than any gown or jewels was the quiet confidence that had settled over her since that night at the soirée. Standing up to Isabella had awakened something in Alana, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "Ready, my dear?" her father asked. Lord Whitmore's relief at his family's financial salvation was palpable, though he had the grace to appear emotional about his daughter's happiness as well. Alana nodded, her eyes finding Alexander at the altar. He stood tall and commanding in his dark blue coat, his gray eyes fixed on her with an expression of such love and pride that her remaining nervousness melted away. The music began, and the congregation rose. As Alana walked down the aisle, she was dimly aware of the whispers, the turned heads, the fans fluttering with gossip. But all of that faded into insignificance beside the man waiting for her. Alexander's smile as she approached was radiant. When her father placed her hand in his, Alana felt as if she were finally coming home. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ancient words and sacred promises. When Alexander slipped the gold band onto her finger, his voice was strong and sure. "With this ring, I be wed." And when the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss that sealed their union was witnessed by all of London and by Isabella, who stood in the family pew with tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of jealousy or rage. These were tears of understanding, of regret, and finally, of genuine happiness for her sister. The transformation in Isabella had begun the morning after the soirée, when she had awakened to find herself the subject of London's most vicious gossip. Her reputation lay in ruins, her prospects destroyed by her own jealous words. Several gentlemen who had previously courted her sent polite notes withdrawing their interest. Invitations to social events suddenly became scarce. For the first time in her life, Isabella experienced what it felt like to be overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. The lowest point had come 3 days later, when she encountered Mrs. Henley struggling with her marketing in the village. The elderly woman, whom Isabella had always considered beneath her notice, looked up with surprise when the beauty of the family stopped to help. "Miss Isabella? How kind of you to stop. It's nothing," Isabella had replied, surprising herself by actually meaning it. As she helped Mrs. Henley with her heavy basket, she found herself really listening to the old woman's gentle chatter about her garden, her late husband, her loneliness. "Your sister visits me every Tuesday," Mrs. Henley mentioned as they parted. "Such a dear girl. She has a gift for making people feel valued." That night, Isabella had gone to Elena's room for the first time since the engagement announcement. Her sister was packing for her move to Ravencrest House after the wedding, carefully folding away her collection of pink gowns. "Alana, Isabella had begun, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Yes, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Isabella sat on the bed, her perfect posture crumbling. The things I said at the soirée. They were unforgivable. Alana set down the gown she was folding and turned to face her sister. Why, Isabella? Why did you hate me so much? I didn't hate you, Isabella replied, then reconsidered. No, that's not true. I did hate you, but not for the reasons you think. I hated you because you made goodness look effortless while I struggled to find any trace of it in myself. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. You were everything I was supposed to be, Isabella continued. Kind, genuine, selfless. And I was everything society told me to be: beautiful, accomplished, charming. But when the Duke chose you over me, it forced me to confront the truth, that all my beauty was just decoration on an empty vessel. That's not true, Alana began. It is, Isabella interrupted. Or it was, but maybe it doesn't have to stay that way. The conversation that followed lasted until dawn, the sisters finally seeing each other clearly for the first time in their lives. They spoke of childhood hurts, of societal pressures, of the different ways they had both been failed by expectations that valued appearance over character. When Alexander arrived for his daily visit, he found the sisters working together to finish Alana's packing. Isabella carefully wrapping the bride's treasured books while Alana sorted through her limited jewelry. Your Grace, Isabella said, rising to curtsy. Her manner was still formal, but the edge of competition was gone. I hope I might have a word. Alexander raised an eyebrow, but followed her to the morning room. I want to thank you, Isabella said without preamble. Thank me? For choosing Alana? For seeing what I was too blind and selfish to recognize? Isabella's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with emotion. My sister is the best person I know, and she deserves a man who understands her worth. I'm grateful that man is you. Alexander studied her for a long moment. And what of your own future, Miss Isabella? Isabella's smile was sad but genuine. I'm learning to define that for myself rather than waiting for society to do it for me. It's liberating, actually. Now watching Alana walk back down the aisle as the new Duchess of Ravencrest, Isabella felt the last of her resentment fade away. Her sister's face was radiant with joy, and Alexander looked as if he'd been handed the keys to paradise. As the newlyweds passed her pew, Alana caught her sister's eye and smiled a smile of forgiveness, of love, of new beginnings for them both. At the wedding breakfast, Isabella surprised everyone by standing to make a toast. Your Graces, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the assembly. I would like to speak about my sister, if I may. A hush fell over the room. Everyone remembered the scene at the soirée, and many expected fireworks. Instead, Isabella's words were pure grace. I have known Alana all my life, and I have spent most of that time failing to truly see her. She is the kindest person I have ever met, the most genuine, the most deserving of every happiness. Your Grace, she turned to Alexander, you have chosen not just a beautiful woman, but the most beautiful soul in all of England. I wish you both every joy. The toast was drunk with enthusiasm, and as Isabella sat down, Alana rose and crossed to her sister's chair. Thank you, she whispered, embracing Isabella warmly. No, Isabella replied, tears in her eyes. Thank you. For showing me what real beauty looks like. 6 months after the wedding, Ravencrest House had been transformed. Under Alana's gentle guidance, what had been a magnificent but cold ducal residence became a warm home filled with laughter, regular guests, and the quiet contentment of a marriage built on genuine affection. Alexander stood in his study, reviewing reports from his various estates, when Morrison announced a visitor. Mrs. Henley to see her grace. She says the Duchess invited her for tea. Alexander smiled. Of course she had. Alana's Tuesday visits to the elderly woman had evolved into regular invitations to the ducal residence, much to the horror of some of the stuffier members of society and the delight of Alexander, who had discovered that Mrs. Henley told the most entertaining stories about London. 50 years ago. Show her to the blue drawing room. I'll inform the Duchess. He found Alana in the morning room, radiant in a gown of soft yellow silk, carefully arranging roses from their garden. The sight of her still had the power to make his heart skip, even after months of marriage. Mrs. Henley has arrived, he announced, crossing to kiss her cheek. Wonderful. I've been looking forward to hearing about her grandson's visit. Alana leaned into his embrace, still marveling at how natural such affection had become between them. And how are you feeling today? Alexander asked, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Alana's smile was incandescent. Better. The morning sickness seems to be easing. The pregnancy had been discovered only a few weeks ago, filling them both with joy and anticipation. Alexander had already begun making plans for the nursery, while Alana spent her evenings knitting tiny garments with an expression of wonder that never failed to move him. Your sister sent another letter, Alexander mentioned, gesturing to the Morning Post. Oh, what news from Bath? Isabella had left London after the wedding to stay with their aunt, partly to escape the lingering gossip about the soirée, but mostly to begin the process of reinventing herself. Her letters had chronicled a remarkable transformation as she discovered the satisfaction of genuine charitable work and the pleasure of friendships based on character rather than social position. She's accepted a position as companion to Lady Worthington's daughter. Apparently the girl is painfully shy and needs someone to help her navigate society. Alana's eyes filled with warmth. How perfect! Isabella's experience with social expectations will serve her well in helping another young woman avoid some of the same pitfalls. She also mentions that Lord Fairfax has been most attentive during his visits to Bath. The widower with 3 young children? Elena's smile was knowing. How interesting. Isabella always did have a talent for managing complex social situations. Perhaps managing a ready-made family would suit her? Alexander marveled at his wife's generosity of spirit. After everything Isabella had put her through, Alana still wanted nothing but happiness for her sister. A commotion in the hallway interrupted his thoughts. Morrison appeared in the doorway looking somewhat flustered. Your Graces, forgive the intrusion, but there's been an incident in the blue drawing room. They hurried to investigate, finding Mrs. Henley in animated conversation with an unexpected guest, the Dowager Duchess of Marlborough, one of society's most formidable matrons and certainly the last person one would expect to find taking tea with an elderly woman of modest means. Ah, Alexander! The Dowager Duchess called out cheerfully. Your wife has the most remarkable friends. Mrs. Henley was just telling me about the time she helped smuggle food to French prisoners during the war. Quite the adventure. Mrs. Henley beamed with pleasure. Her Grace is very kind to say so. I was just doing what needed doing. Alana moved gracefully between her guests, ensuring everyone had fresh tea and making introductions as if entertaining a duchess and a village widow together was the most natural thing in the world. This is what I've been trying to tell the other ladies, the Dowager Duchess continued to Alexander. Your Duchess has introduced something entirely new to London society, genuine substance. Half the young ladies of Baton are now trying to emulate her charitable work, though most of them miss the point entirely. Which is? Alexander asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. That it's not about being seen doing good works. It's about actually caring about the people you're helping. The Dowager Duchess's sharp eyes softened as she watched. Alana gently adjusted a shawl around Mrs. Henley's shoulders. Your wife doesn't perform kindness, Alexander. She simply is kind. Later that evening, after Mrs. Henley had been safely delivered home and the Dowager Duchess had departed with promises to call again soon, Alexander and Alana sat before the fire in their private sitting room. Satisfied with your day's work? Alexander asked, pulling his wife closer on the sofa. Immensely. Did you see how delighted Mrs. Henley was to meet the Dowager Duchess? And her Grace seemed genuinely entertained by the stories. You're changing London society. You know, Alexander said seriously, making it kinder, more inclusive. More real. Alana considered this. I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just being myself. Exactly. Alexander pressed a kiss to her temple. And in a world full of people pretending to be something they're not, authenticity is revolutionary. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the grate, both were lost in contemplation of how dramatically their lives had changed. Alexander found not just a wife, but a partner who made him want to be worthy of her goodness. Alana had discovered that she was not destined for invisibility after all, but rather for a life of quiet influence and genuine connection. Outside, London continued its endless social whirl, but here in Ravencrest House, two souls had found exactly what they needed in each other: acceptance, love, and the freedom to be their truest selves. The baby would arrive in the spring. Isabella's wedding to Lord Fairfax was planned for summer, and the future stretched ahead filled with promise and possibility. Sometimes Alana reflected as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms. The most extraordinary love stories were the ones that looked quite ordinary from the outside. Two people choosing each other not despite their differences, but because of them. And sometimes, just sometimes, the overlooked sister got the fairy tale ending after all. The gardens at Ravencrest House bloomed with unusual magnificence in the early summer of 1840. Lady Alana Blackwood, Duchess of Ravencrest, stood among her beloved roses, watching her 4-year-old son chase butterflies with the single-minded determination that characterized all his endeavors. Little James Alexander had inherited his father's gray eyes and his mother's gentle nature, though he showed early signs of the stubborn streak that ran through both sides of his family. Currently, he was engaged in earnest conversation with Mrs. Henley, who, at 85, still made regular visits to take tea and share stories with the Duchess. He's going to be a heartbreaker, observed Isabella, approaching through the garden path with her own brood in tow. Marriage to Lord Fairfax had softened Isabella's sharp edges, while adding a depth that her youthful beauty had lacked. She was still striking, but now her beauty came from happiness and purpose rather than mere physical perfection. "Mama, may we play with James?" asked little Catherine Fairfax, Isabella's stepdaughter, who had blossomed under her stepmother's patient guidance. "Of course, darling. But mind the roses." As the children scattered through the garden, Isabella settled beside Alana on the marble bench Alexander had installed specifically for their morning conversations. "The house looks magnificent for the party tonight," Isabella observed. "Though I still can't believe it's been 5 years since your wedding. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels as if I've always been this happy." The evening celebration was in honor of Alexander's birthday, but also served as an informal anniversary of sorts, the first time the entire extended family would be together since Isabella's wedding 3 years prior. "Lord and Lady Whitmore arrived this morning," Isabella mentioned casually. "Mama seems quite recovered from the shock of having not one but two daughters married above their stations," Alana smiled. "She's adjusting to grandmotherhood well." Though she still insists on giving me advice about managing servants, some things never change. Isabella paused, then continued more seriously. I've been meaning to thank you again, you know? For what now? For forgiving me. For showing me what real love looks like, what real marriage can be. Isabella's voice carried the weight of genuine emotion. If I hadn't seen how happy you and Alexander are, I might never have had the courage to accept Thomas's proposal. Alana reached over to squeeze her sister's hand. You would have found your way eventually. You just needed to learn to value the right things. Speaking of valuing the right things, Isabella said with a grin, your husband is approaching with that expression that means he's plotting something. Romantic, Alexander emerged from the house carrying a small wrapped package, his face wearing the slightly secretive look that Alana had learned to associate with surprises. At 37, he was more handsome than ever, success and happiness having added an attractive confidence to his already compelling presence. Ladies, he said, bowing formally to Isabella before turning to his wife. My dear, I have something for you. It's your birthday, Alana protested. I should be giving you gifts. Every day with you is a gift, Alexander replied, then laughed at Isabella's exaggerated gagging motion. But this is something special I've been planning for months. Alana unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a leather-bound book. The cover was embossed with gold letters. The Rose Garden, a collection of thoughts on love, kindness, and the beauty of ordinary moments by a Blackwood. Alexander, she breathed, opening to find page after page of her own words letters she'd written to him during their courtship, journal entries about their life together, little poems she penned about their son, thoughts on marriage and motherhood and the small moments that make life meaningful. I had them compiled and bound, Alexander explained, sitting beside her and drawing her close. Because your words, your thoughts, your perspective on life, they're too beautiful to be read by just one person. I want James to read this when he's older, to understand what an extraordinary mother he has. Tears blurred Alana's vision as she flipped through pages of her own handwriting, made precious by his preservation of them. I can't believe you kept all of this. Every letter, every note, every scrap of paper you've ever given me, Alexander confirmed. They're my most treasured possessions. Isabella cleared her throat delicately. While this is absolutely nauseating in the most wonderful way, I should probably mention that your other guests are beginning to arrive. Indeed, carriages were beginning to line the drive. The Dowager Duchess of Marlborough was emerging from her ornate conveyance, followed by Lord and Lady Fairfax's carriage, and several others belonging to the friends they had accumulated over the years, a mix of high society and ordinary people who had somehow formed an unlikely but genuine community around the Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest. Mrs. Henley, Alana called gently, shall we go in and prepare for the party? The elderly woman rose with the careful dignity of age, accepting Alexander's offered arm. I never thought I'd live to see the day when I'd be dining with half the peerage, she mused. Your Grace, you've given me quite an adventure in my old age, and you've given me the gift of your friendship, Alana replied warmly, which is far more valuable than any title. As they walked toward the house together, the Duke and Duchess, the transformed sister, the elderly friend, and the playing children, they presented a picture of contentment that would have been unimaginable 5 years earlier. Alexander paused to look back at the rose garden where he had first seen Alana, where he had first recognized the quiet beauty that had changed his life completely. No regrets? Alana asked softly, following his gaze. Only one, Alexander replied, taking her hand in his. Alana's heart skipped, but Alexander's smile was teasing. I regret that it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. I could have been this happy years sooner if I'd had the wisdom to look beyond the obvious. Perhaps we both needed to be ready, Alana suggested. Perhaps it all happened exactly when it was meant to. Alexander lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her wedding ring. Perhaps you're right. As usual, from the house, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted across the garden. The Dowager Duchess, regaling someone with a scandalous story from her youth. Isabella's stepchildren giggling over some private joke. Lord Fairfax and Alexander's steward discussing crop rotations with surprising enthusiasm. It was, Alana reflected, exactly the kind of life she had never dared to dream of, filled with love, laughter, genuine friendships, and the deep satisfaction of being valued for who she truly was rather than who she was expected to be. The overlooked sister had indeed found her fairy tale ending. But more than that, she had discovered that the most beautiful stories are often the ones that begin not with once upon a time, but with one ordinary day. Someone finally saw me, and they all lived not just happily, but authentically ever after. Dear readers, in a world that too often values surface over substance, appearance over character, noise over quiet strength, the story of Alana and Alexander reminds us that true love sees past the obvious to find the extraordinary in the overlooked. We all have moments when we feel invisible, undervalued, forgotten in favor of those who shine more brightly in society's eyes. But as Alana discovered, our worth is not determined by others' ability to see it. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with dramatic declarations, but with someone finally noticing the kindness we show when we think no one is watching. In our modern world, where social media celebrates the loudest voices and most polished presentations, perhaps we could all learn from Alexander's wisdom in choosing substance over surface, from Alana's grace in remaining true to herself despite pressure to be someone else, and from Isabella's courage in changing course when she realized she had lost her way. The rose garden still blooms at Ravencrest House, tended now by children and grandchildren who learned from the Duchess that true beauty lies not in perfection, but in the patient care we give to the things and people we love. 20 years after the wedding of the Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest, Lady Catherine, Blackwood stood before her mirror in the yellow morning room of Ravencrest House, adjusting the pearl necklace that had been her coming-out gift. At 18, she possessed an intriguing blend of her parents' best qualities, her father's penetrating intelligence and her mother's gentle strength, wrapped in a beauty that was neither conventional nor easily ignored. Unlike her Aunt Isabella's golden perfection or her grandmother's sharp elegance, Catherine's appeal lay in her expressive dark eyes, so like her mother's, and the way her face lit up when she was passionate about something, which, unfortunately for her parents' peace of mind, was quite often. "Catherine, you cannot wear that gown to the Pemberton ball," her mother said, entering the room with the measured grace that had made her one of London's most respected duchesses. Catherine turned from the mirror, revealing a gown of deep emerald silk that was undoubtedly stunning but decidedly unconventional for a young lady making her debut season. "Why not?" "It's beautiful. It fits perfectly. And green has always been my best color," Elena sighed, recognizing her own stubborn streak reflected in her daughter's jutting chin. "Because, my darling girl, it's far too sophisticated for someone your age. You'll overshadow every other young lady in the room." "Good," Catherine replied with characteristic directness. "Perhaps then the gentleman will actually listen when I speak instead of staring glassy-eyed at my décolletage." Catherine Rose Blackwood. Alana tried to sound scandalized, but couldn't quite suppress her smile. Her daughter's forthright manner was both her greatest strength and her parents' greatest worry. "Oh, don't look at me like that. Mama, I've heard Papa and Uncle Thomas discussing the intellectual capacity of this season's crop of bachelors. Apparently, Lord Pemberton's son thinks Napoleon is still alive," and ruling France. Alexander appeared in the doorway at that moment, magnificent in his evening wear, but wearing the long-suffering expression of a father dealing with a headstrong daughter. "What has our daughter done now?" he asked, though his eyes twinkled with poorly concealed pride. "She wants to attend her first major ball dressed like a sophisticated woman of 30, rather than the innocent maiden she's supposed to be." "I am not innocent," Catherine declared with the confidence of youth. "I've read Papa's entire library, including the books he thinks he's hidden from me. I speak 4 languages fluently. I can discuss political theory with Uncle Thomas, and have been helping Mama with her charity work since I was 12. Why should I pretend to be some simpering miss who faints at the sight of a mouse?" Alexander and Alana exchanged a look over their daughters, had the wordless communication of parents who had been united in love and purpose for over 2 decades. "Because," Alexander said gently, "society has expectations of young ladies, and flouting them entirely will only make your path more difficult. But you chose Mama precisely because she was different from society's expectations," Catherine pointed out with devastating logic. "She was quiet and overlooked and kind, not bold and conventional and beautiful like Aunt Isabella was then." "Your mother was beautiful," Alexander corrected firmly. "She simply wasn't flashy about it." Catherine studied her parents with the piercing gaze she had inherited from her father. "So, what you're telling me is that I should hide who I am until some gentleman is wise enough to see past the facade to my true worth." The silence that followed was telling. "That," said a voice from the doorway, "is absolutely not what they're telling you." Everyone turned to see Isabella entering the room. Now Lady Fairfax, and still striking at 38, though her beauty had deepened and softened with experience and motherhood. "Aunt Isabella?" Catherine embraced her favorite relative warmly. "Please tell me you haven't come to lecture me about propriety as well?" "Quite the opposite." Isabella settled gracefully into a chair and fixed her niece with a serious look. "I came to tell you something your parents might be too tactful to say themselves, which is that while your mother succeeded by being authentically herself despite society's expectations, you, my dear Catherine, are an entirely different creature. Your mother's strength was in her gentle kindness and quiet dignity. Yours lies in your brilliant mind and your refusal to suffer fools gladly." Catherine straightened, clearly intrigued. "The mistake would be in trying to be someone you're not," Isabella continued. "But the equal mistake would be in assuming that being yourself means being deliberately controversial. True confidence doesn't need to shock people into paying attention. So, what do you suggest?" Isabella smiled, the warm, genuine expression that had replaced her youthful, calculating smiles. "Wear the blue silk. The one that brings out your eyes without making you look like you're trying to seduce half of London. Let your intelligence shine through your conversation, not your neckline. And trust that any gentleman worth your time will be attracted to your mind rather than intimidated by it." "But what if no one worth my time exists?" Catherine asked with a dramatic despair of youth. "Then you'll live a perfectly fulfilled life as an independent woman with your own interests and pursuits," Alana said firmly. "Marriage should be a choice, not a necessity. Your father and I will ensure you never have to marry for financial security. And if you do choose to marry," Alexander added, "it will be to someone who values your intelligence as much as your beauty, your strength as much as your gentleness." Catherine considered this, absently twisting the pearl necklace between her fingers. "Like you did with Mama?" "Exactly like I did with your mother." A soft knock interrupted the family conference. Morrison appeared in the doorway, his elderly dignity intact despite his years of service. "Your Graces, forgive the interruption, but young Lord Ashford has arrived. He says he promised to escort Lady Catherine to the Pemberton ball." Catherine's face underwent a remarkable transformation, softening from stubborn determination to something approaching shyness. "Oh, I have forgotten. That is, Lord Ashford mentioned he might ... double quotes Alexander and Alana exchanged another look, this one laden with parental concern and curiosity. Lord Ashford Timothy, to those who knew him well, was the eldest son of the Earl of Westbridge, and, at 22, was considered one of the season's most promising young gentlemen. More relevantly, he was one of the few men of Catherine's acquaintance who could match her wit in conversation and seemed genuinely intrigued rather than intimidated by her intellectual pursuits. Perhaps, Isabella suggested with a meaningful look at her niece, you should go change into the blue silk. Lord Ashford has always struck me as the sort of gentleman who appreciates both beauty and substance. Catherine nodded and hurried from the room, leaving the adults to their speculations. Timothy Ashford, Alexander mused. Intelligent, well-read, comes from a good family. His political views align with ours, and he seems genuinely fond of Catherine's. Unique qualities. He also, Alana added with a smile, spent most of last week's dinner party engaging her in a spirited debate about women's education, and he appeared to be enjoying himself immensely when she proved him wrong about Mary Wollstonecraft. A promising sign. Isabella agreed. Though I suspect our Catherine will keep any potential suitor on his toes for quite some time. 20 minutes later, Catherine reappeared in a gown of sapphire blue silk that was both elegant and age-appropriate. The color brought out the depth of her dark eyes, and the cut showed her figure to advantage without being inappropriate. Much better, Alana approved. You look lovely, darling. And more importantly, Isabella added, you look like yourself. Confident, intelligent, beautiful, but not trying to prove anything to anyone. Lord Ashford was waiting in the drawing room, and his face when Catherine entered was everything a father could wish for in a young man looking at his daughter. Admiration, respect, and genuine pleasure in her company. Lady Catherine, he said, bowing elegantly, you look magnificent. Are you ready for what promises to be a thoroughly tedious evening of watching people we don't particularly like pretend to have accomplished something meaningful? Catherine laughed a sound of pure delight. Lord Ashford, how refreshingly honest. Yes, I believe I am ready for exactly that sort of evening. As long as I have someone equally cynical to share observations with, in that case, shall we proceed to be thoroughly superior and judgmental together? I thought you'd never ask. As the young people departed amid fond farewells and parental warnings about proper behavior, Alexander drew his wife close. Do you think we've done well by her? He asked, watching their daughter's animated conversation with young Lord Ashford as they walked to his carriage. I think, Alana said thoughtfully, that we've raised a young woman who knows her own worth and won't settle for less than she deserves. Whether that leads to marriage with Timothy Ashford or some other worthy gentleman or to a fulfilling independent life, I'm confident she'll choose her own path, rather like her mother did, Alexander observed. Rather like her mother learned to do with the help of a very patient duke, Alana corrected. Isabella, who had been watching the young couple with interest, turned back to her brother and sister-in-law. They're well matched, those two. She'd keep him thinking, and he'll appreciate her for it rather than trying to dim her brightness. Speaking from experience? Alexander asked with a pointed look at Isabella's own happy marriage. Indeed, Thomas still claims that marrying me was like capturing lightning in a bottle dangerous, but absolutely worth the risk. Isabella's smile was soft with contentment. Though I suspect young Catherine is more like a steady flame than lightning. Brilliant, warm, impossible to ignore, but controlled and purposeful. Through the window, They could see Lord Ashford helping Catherine into his carriage with careful attention to her comfort, then taking a seat beside her with the easy familiarity of long friendship that was blossoming into something deeper. The next generation, Alana murmured. I wonder what their story will be. Whatever it is, Alexander said, pressing a kiss to his wife's temple. They have the advantage of having been raised by parents who understand that true love sees past society's expectations to the person beneath, and the disadvantage, Isabella added with a grin, of having parents who will absolutely interfere if they think their children are settling for less than they deserve. As the carriage disappeared into the London evening, the three adults settled in for a quiet evening together, content in the knowledge that they had done their best to prepare the next generation for whatever challenges and joys awaited them. In the blue drawing room where Mrs. Henley had once taken tea with a duchess, where scandals had been weathered and love had triumphed, the family that had been built on choosing substance over surface, authenticity over expectation, gathered to celebrate another milestone in their continuing story. Some love stories, they had learned, don't end with happily ever after. The best ones continue, generation after generation, creating new chapters of hope, growth, and the eternal truth that real love, the kind worth having, always begins with seeing and valuing what others might overlook. The rose gardens still bloomed outside the windows, tended now by 3 generations of hands, a living reminder that the most beautiful things in life are often the ones that grow quietly, patiently, and with careful attention from those who understand their true worth. Found among the papers of the Duchess of Ravencrest, written throughout her marriage, letter 1, to Alexander, 1 year after their wedding, my dearest husband. Today marks our first wedding anniversary, and I find myself marveling at how completely my life has changed. A year ago, I was the overlooked daughter, the one who tended roses while her sister collected suitors. Today, I am writing this letter from our beautiful home, with our first child growing beneath my heart and the knowledge that I am cherished beyond measure. But what strikes me most is not how different I feel, but how completely myself I have remained. You did not ask me to become someone else to earn your love. You simply saw who I already was and decided I was worthy of your devotion. What a gift that has been. I was thinking this morning about something Mrs. Henley said during yesterday's visit. She mentioned that true love doesn't make us into different people. It makes us into the best versions of who we already are. In loving you, in being loved by you, I have discovered strengths I never knew I possessed and found courage to speak truths I once kept silent. Thank you for seeing me, my darling. Thank you for choosing the rose gardener over the diamond. Forever yours, Alana, letter 2. To Isabella, 5 years after the wedding, my dear sister. Your letter about Lord Fairfax's proposal filled me with such joy that I had to set it aside twice before I could finish reading through my tears. To know that you have found a love built on genuine affection and mutual respect, the kind you once dismissed as impossible, feels like the completion of some cosmic justice. You write that you are grateful to me for showing you what real love looks like, but I must return the compliment. Watching you transform from the bitter, jealous woman you had become into the generous, loving person you truly are beneath all that pain has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. We were both trapped, weren't we? You by the expectations of your beauty, me by the assumptions of my plainness. Neither of us was free to simply be ourselves until circumstances forced us to confront who we really were beneath society's definitions. I am so proud of the woman you have become, Isabella. Lord Fairfax is getting not just a beautiful wife, but a woman of substance, compassion, and hard-won wisdom. His children are fortunate indeed to have you as their stepmother. Your loving sister, Alana, letter 3. To Catherine, on her 16th birthday, my precious daughter, as I write this, You are sleeping in your childhood bed for perhaps one of the last times before society claims you as a young lady to be launched into the marriage market. The thought fills me with equal measures of pride and trepidation. You are so much braver than I was at your age, so much more sure of your own worth. Where I learned to make myself small to avoid disappointment, you have learned to take up space unapologetically. Where I waited for others to notice my value, you announce it with every intelligent question, every passionate argument, every moment of stubborn integrity. But my darling girl, as you prepare to enter a world that will try to define you by its own narrow standards, remember this: your worth is not determined by who chooses you, but by who you choose to be. Marry for love if love finds you, but never marry from fear of being alone. A life lived authentically in solitude is infinitely preferable to a life lived falsely in company. You have advantages I never had: education, financial security, parents who will support your choices, whatever they may be. You use those advantages not just for your own happiness, but to help other young women who may not be so fortunate. Your father and I have tried to raise you to be strong, kind, and true to yourself. Now we must trust that these lessons will guide you well. All my love always, Mama Letter 4 to Alexander. On their 25th wedding anniversary, my beloved Alexander, 25 years. A quarter of a century since that afternoon when you found me in the garden and saw something worth cherishing. As I sit in that same garden today, surrounded by grandchildren and the roses that still bloom faithfully each spring, I am overwhelmed with gratitude for the life we have built together. We were not a likely pair, were we? The powerful Duke and the forgotten daughter. But perhaps that very unlikelihood is what made our love so strong. We chose each other not because it was expected or easy, but because we recognized something essential in each other's souls. You have given me confidence without asking me to abandon humility, strength without sacrificing gentleness, a voice without losing my capacity to listen. In loving me, you taught me to love myself, not the self I thought I should be, but the self I actually am. And what have I given you in return? I hope I have been a refuge from the demands of your position, a place where the Duke can simply be Alexander. I hope I have shown you that power exercised with compassion is the truest strength of all. Our children are grown now, making their own choices, their own mistakes, their own discoveries about love and life. But they carry with them the knowledge that genuine affection exists, that marriages can be partnerships of equals, that love, real love, sees past the surface to the soul beneath. That may be our greatest legacy, not the titles or the wealth or the social position, but the example of two people who chose to see each other truly and found that what they saw was worth a lifetime of devotion. Thank you, my darling husband, for 25 years of being seen, being valued, being cherished for exactly who I am. Yours in all things, Alana. Final letter to her granddaughter, Lady Margaret Ashford. On her wedding day, my dearest Margaret, as I write this, you are preparing for your wedding to young Lord Sinclair, and I find myself thinking of another wedding 28 years ago when your mother married your father. How proud I was that day to see our Catherine choose a man who valued her mind as much as her beauty, her strength as much as her gentleness. Now you, the next generation of strong women in our family, are making your own choice. I am delighted that you have found in Lord Sinclair a man who appreciates your artistic talents, supports your work with the orphanage, and seems genuinely enchanted by your unconventional views on everything from literature to politics. But more than that, I am proud that you are marrying him not because you need to, but because you want to. You have seen examples of marriages built on love and mutual respect, and you have refused to settle for anything less. My dear granddaughter, you are the culmination of all our hopes and dreams for the next generation. In you, I see your mother's brilliant mind, your grandmother Isabella's reformed social conscience, and perhaps a touch of my own quiet determination to be true to yourself despite external pressures. As you begin this new chapter of your life, remember that the greatest gift you can give your husband is not your compliance, but your authentic self. Marriage at its best is not the merging of two incomplete people into one whole, but the partnership of two complete individuals choosing to share their journey. Love boldly, speak honestly, and never forget that you are the granddaughter of women who learn that true worth comes from within, not from the approval of others. With all my love and pride, your devoted grandmother, Alona, Duchess of Ravencrest. These letters, preserved in the family archives, stand as testimony to a love that began with seeing past surface appearances to the heart beneath, and grew into a legacy that shaped generations of children who learned that authentic love, the kind worth having, always begins with being brave, enough to show your true self to someone worthy of seeing it. The end, dear beloved viewers. We've reached the end of this extraordinary journey through the halls of Ravencrest House and the hearts of those who learn that true love sees beyond society's shallow expectations. From Alana's quiet strength in the rose garden to Catherine's bold confidence in the ballroom, from Isabella's redemption to the legacy of authentic love that shaped generations, this story reminds us that we all have the power to choose substance over surface, authenticity over appearance. If this tale of overlooked worth and transformative love touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember their own value. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the triumph of genuine character over superficial charm. Like this video if you believe that kindness, intelligence, and authenticity are the most beautiful qualities anyone can possess. And comment below to share your own stories of being truly seen by someone who matters. Your experiences inspire us to continue sharing tales of love that transforms, heals, and endures. Remember, dear ones, in a world obsessed with filters and facades, the most revolutionary act is simply being authentically yourself. Somewhere someone is waiting to see exactly who you really are, and when they do, they'll wonder how anyone ever overlooked such treasure. Until our next story together, may you choose to see and be seen with the clear eyes of love. Thank you for allowing us to share this journey with you.